Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Richard Taunt. I'm part of the team here at Kaleidoscope. If you've joined a Kaleidoscope webinar before, you'll know we normally dress like this, but today's webinar, I've been left thinking I should probably be here in black tie or something similar. This is our first ever Kaleidoscope film premiere, and it's a great joy and honour to have you for joining it. So welcome very much if you're joining live, or if you're joining from the future, if you're watching repeat, very much welcome to you too. I think we're going to have a fascinating hour. We're joined by a superstar panel. Georgie, Jenna, Alex, I'll allow you to introduce yourselves.
I'm Georgie Gill. I'm a poet that was brought in to work by Jenna to work on this project, which was great. I'm also a researcher, but in health and social sciences.
And Georgie, I don't think we've ever had a poet on one of these webinars before, so it's a first in so many ways today.
Great.
Jenna.
I'm Jenna. I am a researcher at the University of Dundee, and I'm also the lead for allied health professions research in NHS Tayside.
Great to have you with us, Jenna.
I am Alex. I'm a speech and language therapist working in Dundee, and I'm currently working in the brain injury rehabilitation sector.
Lovely. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thanks again, everyone who is tuning in. So if you wonder exactly what it is that we're going to be discussing today, so today is all about, I think, a really fascinating project. So in spring 2019, supported by the Scottish University's Insight Institute, a diverse group of allied health professionals, researchers and creative experts, including poets, technologists, designers and artists, got together to develop innovative solutions to one of the most pervasive problems in health and social care. And you may be sitting there going, oh, this isn't a pervasive problem. If you're not thinking it is, please let us know the answer, because it's one which fascinates us all. That question, of course, being, how do we make research useful for practice? I don't think anyone's ever cracked that fully yet, have they?
No.
No, okay, but I think we're going to advance that over the next 58 minutes or so. So working across disciplines, Jenna and colleagues have co-designed and prototyped new ways of presenting research knowledge that, unlike journal articles, are useful and accessible for healthcare practitioners. So some of the things we're going to be talking about today are things like games, websites, social media campaigns, poems, and more. So I think, well, we're due to talk for an hour. I think we could probably talk for several weeks.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to extend the webinar to several weeks, but we'd love you to keep the conversation going after this particular discussion finishes. So once again, I'm Rich from Kaleidoscope, joined by Peter in our backroom team. Could we have some slides, Peter? So just to remind you what the aims are for today's webinar. Next slide, please, Peter. So what we're trying to do here today is sort of demonstrate the innovative process undertaken to co-design and prototype new ways of presenting research knowledge, focusing on what is useful and accessible, so broadening the understanding of what was found out during this process. And we're going to have an interactive panel discussion. Hello, panel, are you ready for an interactive discussion?
Yep.
So hopefully that's going to be, well, hopefully that's what you are hoping to join. I think we're going to have a great discussion. Next slide, please, Peter. So we're going to be having a conversation here. You're going to be watching the premiere of the film to talk more about this project. But also we would love to hear your insight, your input, your wisdom, your questions as we go through. And there are three ways you can do that today. You can use the Ask Question feature on GoToWebinar, which should be sitting there on your screens in some location. If you're struggling to find that, do not worry at all. You can email us at hello@kscopehealth.org.uk and we'll pick those up. Or you can tweet us. So our Kaleidoscope username handle is @kscopehealth, but the hashtag which we are using today, is creative AHPs. Creative AHPs is the hashtag for today, so please do tweet along. If your computer suddenly decides in the middle of all this that it doesn't want to be a computer any longer and it wants to be a toaster or something else, don't worry, we're recording today's session and we'll make the recording available afterwards. Indeed, if you're watching this live, you'll receive an email about an hour afterwards with a link to it. So please do share it with all your friends and family after today's showing. Next slide, please, Peter. So just a reminder about who you've got here. Richard Taunt from Kaleidoscope, Jenna, Alex, and Georgie. Thank you very much, Peter. So just please do join in as we go through. We're going to have the film and then we're going to come to your questions after that. So please do join us for questions. Again, that hashtag to use for Twitter purposes as we go through creative AHPs. Jenna, I've given a slight flavour of what we're going to be discussing, but this is a fascinating project. Do you want to tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, so the motivation really for this project came from me feeling that we need to change the conversation about research impact and to change the way we talk about it. So at the moment we use a lot of metaphors of pathways to impact and the pipeline between producing research and then actually using it in practice. And part of the problem of this approach is that it's very linear. It's about researchers doing research and then pushing that onto practitioners to use. And we focus on asking how can we get research into practice rather than what knowledge is useful for practice and how can we as researchers do things differently to make sure that it's useful and accessible. So the existing research and initiatives that have looked at research use have typically focused on medical professions and to a lesser extent nursing. And although they will share some similarities with allied health professionals, there's also going to be differences. So allied health professionals constitute 12 to 14 different distinct professions, such as physiotherapy, speech and language therapy, arts therapy, podiatry, so on. And these professions provide really essential diagnosis, treatment and rehabilitation for people of all ages in different sectors, from the NHS through to social care, private and voluntary sectors. So they work in really diverse areas. Each of the professions is distinctly unique in terms of the types of knowledge that they use. And so that diversity and scope of practice means that they're going to face different challenges when it comes to implementing research into practice and making research useful. So it seemed like a great opportunity really to bring together AHPs and researchers and people from other disciplines to try and answer that question. So I don't want to give away too much because the documentary will hopefully explain a lot of what we did and what the project involved.
Jenna, thank you very much indeed. And you may well be joining us from an AHP background or research background, or just fascinated by this question. Whichever perspective you're coming at this from, you're very much welcome. We look forward to your comments and questions as we go through. I think we've probably built up this film enough now.
Yeah.
Shall we cue the film? So this is the official launch of the documentary talking about your project.
Yep, the world premiere.
The world premiere. Remember where you were at this moment.
So, hi everybody, welcome to Dundee and welcome to our creative workshop series. So at the moment there's a massive lag in terms of getting research into practice. It's something like 17 to 20 years from doing a piece of research to actually seeing it being implemented and being used. And my role in the NHS is to try and develop allied health professionals' research culture and skills to upskill them to be able to find and access and use research and get it into practice. But what that does is it puts all of the onus on the health professionals for this big lag and this gap between research getting into practice. And what we're trying to do here is to say that actually researchers need to be a whole lot better at producing research products that are more useful, more usable, more accessible and much more targeted towards what allied health professionals actually need. So we've brought together allied health professionals, researchers and people from various creative fields. So we've got people from poets to technologists to designers to try and bring that different lens to the problem to see if we can find the space in between our disciplines to do something new and radical.
I've got quite a long-standing interest in design and co-design, but I haven't actually done much of it hands-on myself, so the chance to come and actually take part in some co-design workshops was really intriguing.
I am actually a researcher, but I've got a background as a practitioner, and it's quite exciting to be able to put the two things together and to be in a room with lots of people who are as interested as I am in how you get knowledge to work for our services and our people, and really in ourselves, because we are the users as well.
I think as somebody who's in the early stages of a PhD, which looks at creative practice and health practice coming together, it seemed like a logical thing for me to get involved with. I've got a creative angle on this, and I also have a researcher angle on this, so it's nice to see how the people who use it out on the battlefield kind of might use things.
I'm really hoping to learn much more about the AHPs. My background is in humanities and in comic studies, so it's not an area that I'm particularly familiar with, but I do expect to learn quite a bit from colleagues and people that I get to speak with.
I've just really liked the creative approach that Jenna's taking and all the communication. It was really kind of making me curious and thinking, oh, what's this going to be like? It's a bit different. So yeah, I think it'll give me some ideas as well about working with other people and working with groups, which isn't an intention of it, but I think I can see that already.
This is an exercise in bringing together people who are vastly different. So my hope is that bringing them all together works and it sparks creativity, and we get some new and useful solutions to this hugely pervasive problem, which is how we ensure that we use research to inform and to improve practice.
I'm not quite sure what to expect, but I think that's part of the purpose of creative workshops, that you come in with a bit of a blank slate and have some fun and are creative, and hopefully something interesting comes out at the end of it.
I know that there are more specific aspirations, perhaps to develop a tool or an algorithm or something that allows us to address the challenges that there are between generating the evidence and actually what we do with patients. And I think that's a multifaceted and complicated conundrum really around how evidence-based practice develops. I think on a personal basis, I would find it stimulating and rewarding, and hopefully expand my own thinking and knowledge around delivering evidence-based practice.
I think long-lasting and collaborative partnerships would be the primary hope and also objective, and to come up with creative solutions.
My hope is that we generate radically different ways of doing things, and that's really sparked by that interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary connection.
Your thanks, Jenna, to everybody, and really looking forward to seeing everybody next week.
In the first workshop, we spent time focusing on understanding what allied health professionals do, what decisions they make in their day-to-day practice, the types of knowledge that they draw on, to come up with a collective understanding of what useful knowledge actually looks like. And so today we're building on that, and we are generating as many ideas as possible to come up with new knowledge products. So new ways of presenting research that is more useful, more accessible, more relevant, more exciting, more easy to implement in practice. So what they're doing is they're taking part in a creativity cafe. So they're moving around a variety of tables. Each table is hosted by a different creative expert, and they are generating on post-it notes as many ideas as possible. And then later on this afternoon, they will select their best idea, and that will be the idea that they take forward to prototype in the next workshop.
So today we've been workshopping different ideas about what kind of knowledge products might best suit or might best work for AHPs. And now we've just broken into groups. We decided on which ideas each group is going to work on, and so we're just now in the process of developing prototypes.
We have been asked to think creatively, think out the box about how we can put together some tools. We can use some different methods of sharing information, of using new methods really of getting the messages out there that we want to. And it's been interesting, and I've had quite a few ideas that I'd never have thought of otherwise.
It's been really interesting talking to the creative people about how they could add value to what we're doing, and they see the issues and the mechanics of creating good visual creative products, which as practitioners it's the last thought in your mind. I was worried about how you would benchmark quality within research in different forms that are not your traditional, you can read the author and it's in a 5-star journal and all these kind of things. But using the creative process, there are other ways that are more aesthetic that indicate quality as well. And it's not something you really think about when you're a practitioner or a researcher.
Today we've already talked about the possibility of a kind of Trivial Pursuit board game for AHPs, and also maybe some video reality games. The thing that surprised me most was we were given a task with a cup, an elastic band, a safety pin and a paperclip, and we had to come up with inventions. And I couldn't think of a single thing initially, but we actually came up with 4, which really did surprise me because that's so not my sort of thing.
The thing that has surprised me the most, and yet has also surprised me the least, is just how well people are working together. This was a huge gamble to take people who are so incredibly different and trap them in a room together and hope that they come up with some sort of shared understanding of each other that they could connect, and then to identify tangible ideas and projects. And it was what I hoped for, but I'm still surprised by how well they're working together and how much they seem to be getting out of it.
This process ongoing last week and this week is challenging my thinking, if you like, around my own experiential knowledge of models and what other things are available. So for example, the visual arts elements around things like developing comics to convey evidence, using art to convey evidence in a particular way, in particular settings, which is, I suppose, quite different for me, given my experience.
The notion of storytelling is something that's emerged quite strongly from the group discussions, as well as really creative ideas about different knowledge products, so things to do with gaming, for example, and apps, as well as other kind of strategies I've found really interesting.
I think it's not necessarily making me think differently about my work as in the kind of research I do, but it is making me think more broadly about the kind of ways that we communicate with people.
It's probably made me think about when I'm sharing knowledge. So when I've gone to share some knowledge, I'm really thinking, now how am I going to share this? So I was doing that last week with a survey that had come in to be distributed to people. So instead of just sending it out, it was like, can I frame some questions, or can I ask other people about this? So it's not just the kind of, here you go, this will be interesting to you. So it's made me think about how I share information or knowledge.
So at the end of the last workshop they had half an hour, 45 minutes to start putting together their ideas. And then there's been a flurry of communication during the week. People either using Slack or email or texting each other to share ideas about what resources they might need to bring along, so what materials they might need. And then they came in today, and normally we would have a sort of introduction session, but we didn't do that today. We just said come along, and basically from 12 until 2:30 is your time to work in your groups to develop your prototypes.
So today we are building or creating our prototypes for the research product. The best way I can describe that is chaos. It's a productive, hopefully, chaos, and very creative. I can only speak to the group that I'm in because it's so all-encompassing, but we're looking at story writing, potentially filmmaking, creating a play. I don't think we're going to get it finished within the next 25 minutes, but we've got lots of ideas to move forward with.
So the group that I'm working with, we all chose storytelling as our main kind of strategy for sharing knowledge. So we all decided that we'd go away and each of us write a brief story of some kind. We've come together today and each of us has written a really different type of story. I wrote a play, someone wrote a kind of a personal reminiscence. So we're going to kind of workshop those in terms of how we can bring them together to help researchers and AHP professionals think about translating their research into practice.
Last week when we left, it was sort of, we had a bit of an idea of what we were going to do, but also that scary bit of like, what are we going to do? So yeah, the communication throughout the week has really kind of helped to get a better idea of that. I'm not saying that we have a full idea still of it, but just everybody's had a very different perspective, and we were sharing our own stories, and we were doing that by email. So it could really start to see the different types of styles and how we could bring that together. So it's already quite busy, and everyone's really focused on deciding how we're going to describe what we've been working on, and lots of ideas and different things on the table, and so it's got a real buzz about it actually.
From what seemed a bit of a vacuum, that oh my goodness, nothing's happening and nobody's thinking about this and we're not going to have anything to talk about, we've actually got quite a lot of things to talk about.
So we were in the group that was going to design a game for explaining evidence to people. And so over the week we've been talking about different game formats. There was suggestions for Cards Against Humanity, but we didn't quite think that worked. We'd also talked about Trivial Pursuit. We weren't quite sure about that. So we've now got a format that we've evolved during the week, which is a sort of patient journey through stroke. And on each side of the board we've got a different bit of the journey. And you spin a spinner that takes you to a colour-coded card. And the cards are going to be different types of questions. So some of them will be about evidence, some of them about experience, and some of them about events.
Our group was really formed around looking at ways of delivering information in short sound bites. We were calling it 2-minute talks. We'd have to do a Dragon's Den, I suppose, type punt of what it is that we're proposing. Exactly how that presentation is going to look right now, I'm not absolutely certain. Whether we will have actual product to show or whether we were just talking around what the proposition is, I'm not certain. We do have bits of material that we can link to, so it may be that we can demonstrate some of what we're talking about. But I think right now we probably won't be presenting a finished product, but hopefully we'll be giving a fair representation of what it might look like.
So our group was looking at the idea of stories, and stories is a way of sharing research findings.
You can look at your current articles, and then you can look at archived articles. So this is your own login.
So as we were kind of talking it through, somebody said, well, it's a bit like Pinterest for clinicians. So we decided to call it Clinterest. So this would be our Clinterest page.
We are hoping that it would be used with a research team, and we've called it Get a Grip. And the GRIP stands for Getting Research into Practice.
I'd say there's been a big shift from last week to this week in terms of productivity and what everybody's doing, and it's happening really quickly.
I think I was surprised how quickly it came together actually, how easily the creatives on the team could just produce stuff.
For practitioners, they talk a lot about how time is a barrier. Time's a barrier to accessing research knowledge, and it's a time barrier when it comes to planning research projects or doing research projects. But what this is really evidence of is how much you can achieve in a really short space of time with really limited resource when you work with the right people. Last week we had a showcase of all of the prototypes that we had developed for our new knowledge products. So we had 7 in total, ranging from web-based ideas through to things that were a bit more tangible, like games. We had a couple of game ideas. One of the ideas that actually was my favourite, if you like, was the 2-minute talks, and the idea of having a Twitter channel at AHP 2-minute talks where we have different allied health professionals videoing themselves talking about a piece of research or a piece of evidence and making it accessible to others.
I quite enjoyed the prototype that the group I was in was involved in developing, which was about storytelling, because it was difficult to maybe see at the beginning what it would end up looking like, and so it was really good just to see it coming together, and we worked very well as a team, and before we knew it we had a little film made and a website template, and I could actually visualise it being used in practice, and thinking yes, that would be good. And I also really liked the Pinterest type prototype idea, because just the visual part of that, and yeah, being able to have something that people could visually see and then go further and further down into it and have a collection of what was of interest to them.
But I thought the board game solutions, of which there were a couple, were very interesting. There probably wasn't one that stood out distinctly from the others, but I just recall that there was an exciting variety that we saw.
Jenna started today by encouraging us to think about constellations and the connections between stars. So she asked us all to start by a bit of creative play, making a star in whatever way we wanted, decorating it how we wanted, and the only thing that it had to include was our name. Then we stuck those up on a big black sky, and then she asked us to link to other stars, and it was a silver line for surprising connections, people you'd met that you'd never have met that you were really interested by, and gold for the people where it was something tangible that you were going to carry on working together.
For me, the highlight of the workshop series really has been meeting lots of different people, people that I would have never had the opportunity to meet in normal or in everyday circumstances.
I think it's taken me out of my sort of comfort zone and out of my box of what I expected to see research being showcased as. So I see it very differently now, and I think I've learned a lot from working with others.
I think one of the things the opportunity has done is to encourage people from very diverse backgrounds to think about what they can do together, and I think whatever is produced in the 4 weeks is a good starting point, but I really do think that just the fact that you've sowed seeds and you've met people who are interested in the same areas but think differently about it, that I think is the value going forward.
It's been very enlightening, it's been very thought-provoking. In some ways it's been challenging because perhaps it's not easy to go away from a comparatively safe place to somewhere that you're relatively exposed because it's unfamiliar. But I think I've got enough from the last 4 weeks to realise that we need to be doing that in some way, shape or form.
For me, the learning is think about how people receive information, think about how people want to share their knowledge, and can you do that in a more creative way that is more meaningful to people, if that makes sense.
What constitutes useful knowledge for practice is knowledge that is accessible, it is embodied, it's visual, you can observe it, you can feel it. That was one of the things that really came across from the practitioners, was useful knowledge to them is not big, long, written journal articles or written communication. It's about something that they can see and hear and feel. It becomes internalised. It's not knowledge that sits outside of them and their sphere of practice. It's something that they take in, they internalise, and it becomes part of them. And if we can, as researchers, produce research knowledge in a way that can be consumed so that it becomes internal, then that's when we will have been really successful at creating research knowledge that is actually useful and usable for practice.
That was the premiere, which I very much hope you enjoyed. And Jenna, what a lovely film. Do you want to say a bit about how it was produced?
Yeah, just to say a big thank you really to Liam Johnston from Man Alive Studios and Bonnie Bray Studios in Dundee for doing a great job with the documentary and for just being a really great presence at the workshops, because it was quite meta in a way, because he was there almost, as a creative expert in film, and part of his responsibility was trying to capture our learning and share. We're using this documentary to share what we did in a research process, and I think he's done that really well.
Lovely. Your meta point that indeed this is a webinar about sharing learning about sharing learning.
Yeah.
So I presume if you've now shared this with a colleague, you're sharing learning about sharing learning. I think you get the point. Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Back to this is your opportunity to send through comments, questions, reflections, and thank you so much to everyone who's already doing that now. Again, you may be watching us from the future. This may be a downloaded video at a later date. Mind you, if you're joining live, it will be made available at a later point. So if you're scribbling notes in the prospect that you'll never hear it again, don't fear. We will be sharing that link with you. So please do get involved. That hashtag again, creative AHPs, or you can use the ask question feature in GoToWebinar, or if none of that is working, please do use the email address hello@kscopehealth.org.uk. So we very much hope you can get involved. So I think we'll start. Should we start with some quick fire questions, and then we've got a whole range of questions coming through. And thanks also for people who shared questions ahead of time as well. What should we start? Jenna, a couple of lovely questions here. Similar from both from Jan and from Sharon. Sharon saying, is anecdotal and case study evidence adequate to inform service provision? Jan, thanks very much for sending this to Jan, saying, how do we ensure research is still valid if we are adapting it to make it more accessible and useful to practice? That question, valid, that word valid, Jenna, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, they're really interesting questions, and actually questions that we grappled with during the process as came out in the documentary. So at one point, Anne-Marie, who's a speech and language therapist by background and a researcher, talks about the importance of working with the creative experts to learn about different ways of marking quality. And actually what I think we're speaking about here is our definition of valid. Mm-hmm. And the way in which research works at the moment is that we determine whether research is valid and credible and excellent on the basis of how it was done. So we retrospectively look back to assess the methodological choice, how the research was conducted, how it was presented, and that determines its excellence. But you could have the most beautifully conducted piece of research that actually isn't used in practice because it's not relevant, it doesn't ask relevant questions, it doesn't answer questions in a relevant way, and practitioners don't see it as being useful in practice. So I guess, as I said at the beginning, what I'm interested in doing is changing our conversation around about research impact, to think more about usefulness as a marker of quality. So do we need to shift the way that we think about validity, not just in terms of how research is produced, but how it is used? And so we want to move away from this idea that academia and research is at the top of the hierarchy, and we're pushing it into practice, and we're blaming practitioners for not acting on it. You know, we say, let's upskill you, let's train you how to use research evidence, rather than looking at our research systems and the assumptions that we hold within them about what is valid and what is useful and usable. So that's what I hope that this project has started to do. And it was actually that interaction between the health professionals, the researchers, and people from different creative disciplines, was to think about not just how do we produce products that look different, but how do we change the research process, and who is involved and who has a valid voice within that.
Thanks so much. So if you thought you were joining this event to have a nice cosy lunchtime viewing of a film premiere and not be overly challenged, how do we redefine the validity of research for a question to get you going? I'd love your comments back on that. Just a quick reminder about people who want to join on Twitter, that hashtag creative AHPs. Lovely to see comments coming back through. Michelle, thanks so much for joining, saying this is what I dreamed of 25 years ago. Just shows how long it takes for ideas to be taken seriously. Great to see creative AHPs. Michelle, thanks so much for joining. Alex, we'll come to you if that's okay. Lovely question from Matthew, saying, how can we best excite and encourage our students to use research in practice? Alex.
Yeah, that's a really good question, because as a novice practitioner, I think I came into working thinking, I'm not a researcher, I'm not research minded at all, and really seen it as two separate ideas, that they didn't coexist. And I think it's about finding your own learning style, what works for you, how can you take research and really take just useful points from it, but also remembering that you're not doing it alone, to discuss it, to speak about it with others, speak about it with your practice educators, with your colleagues, and that's, I think, how you get the word spread and learn a bit more from one another. And I think as a practice educator myself, it's about being really enthusiastic about research and passing that on to students, just to set a new feeling towards research and get it involved sooner in their learning. Yeah, in their learning process.
Thanks so much. So very much something about how that starting assumption of what research is and how you relate to it needing to be re-examined. Thanks very much. And Georgie, we're not going to sort of exempt you from this. So it's not many research projects which have poets at their centre. I don't think, anyway, unless I've fallen asleep for quite a long time.
It's an increasing field.
Yeah. Oh, okay, good.
Well, I hope so, because that's what my PhD is, poetry and health science. But sorry, continue.
It's partly come through from the video. But what do you see as the real value in involving these sort of cross-discipline insights into work such as this?
I think there's a lot here about that idea of bridging research and practice. And I think from my perspective, maybe from some of the other creative practitioners, was the idea that you can build a bridge through a creative practice. Alex is speaking about how people might feel that they couldn't access research as novice practitioners, or that different styles appeal to different people. And we all have different learning styles. We all have different communication styles. And I think it really came across in the film. We were allowed to play. We think being a creative expert makes me sound incredibly fancy, and I'm going to roll with that and pretend I am. But at the end of the day, my first job, poetry, is about playing with words and having fun. So to enable people to think differently was, I think, hopefully what Jenna was hoping it would bring to it.
Georgie, let's just stick with that theme for a second, if that's okay, because there might well be people joining who say, lovely, great, I'll have some of that, please. And a nice question too from Michelle. Thank you, Michelle, saying, so how might a person begin to develop networks of support to try do work, research and dissemination differently? I think part of the subtext there is that if you don't know a poet, if you don't know a graphic designer and a games designer, where do you even start? What would your advice be?
Poets are very easy to employ. We're an underemployed resource. It might be difficult with games designers. I don't know. Jenna, how did you actually find us all, Jenna?
Well, it was actually all through my own networks and then spiralling out. I, as a researcher, am most comfortable when I'm working with people who are not in my own discipline. I love to be thrown into other disciplines, because I think the learning that you get from that is incredible, and we don't do enough of it at all in health. And so it was just through the different networks that I had, and it was actually about not being afraid to approach people and ask people to take part. And part of my job in the NHS, which is to try and support more practitioners to be engaged in research, and one of the most common pieces of advice I give to people is that if there's a particular hero in your field who's publishing in your area, then get in touch with them, contact them, send them an email. Speaking as a researcher, if I get an email from someone that says, I'm really interested in working with you, I've heard about your work, it makes my day. And so we're all like that. And I guess I wasn't afraid to get in touch with people who, I would love to be a poet. And so I'd love to be an artist. And I guess it's just having the courage to get in touch with people, because the worst thing that they can say is no or ignore you. But actually what was really exciting was just how willing people were to get involved and to take part. And everybody came to the process with their own insecurity. So I was the person with all of the emails. They were getting in touch with me saying, oh, really, do you want me? Do I have the right expertise? And it was just about kind of reassuring everyone that this is new.
Yes.
We're not here to learn from the creative experts particularly. We're not here to just listen to the practitioners. It's about how can we work in a transdisciplinary way. So I would say from my perspective, it was having the openness. But then maybe, why did you respond when I emailed you?
Because it sounded fun. It's an interesting thing to do.
Yes.
Well, sort of selfishly, my own research, I look at poetry with patients, and then going back, it's research. And I was thinking, there's an obvious missing link here. There's one big apex in that triangle that I'm actually not engaging with, or I don't identify as myself. I'm not a practitioner of any kind. So I thought, it makes good sense. On a really practical note, it just occurred to me that if people really don't have an existing network like Jenna, certainly in Scotland, get in touch with Creative Scotland.
Creative Scotland
will know people. And I imagine that possibly Arts Council England might fulfil a similar criteria.
Sounds like a good place to start.
Yeah, I would have thought. I've often had phone calls from places like that who are like, because you build up a bit of a reputation for working with this specific field. It's like, I know 3 poets who work specifically around chronic fatigue. So get approached about issues like that.
To make clear that not everything good just goes on in Scotland.
No,
there's good work going on outside Scotland.
Apparently so.
We hear. So I think that's a really important point, and thank you for all questions coming through. We're going to come to them in a second. In terms of the point you make about that insecurity and unease people bring to this process, and people might be watching thinking, oh, I feel a bit uneasy. Feeling slightly uneasy, that's good to get your reflection. It's actually just part of it. You're sort of being involved in something like that is going to be challenging, but it's sort of necessary to actually get the sort of results which you've managed to get.
I think working out with your comfort zone really brings out skills that you didn't think you had before. And not only just working with the creative experts, they were able to say, yeah, but you could do this for us, and vice versa. We worked really well together, and each week we were sort of thrown out of our comfort zone, and at first you thought, gosh, I was one of those people that's like, am I meant to be invited? I'm not sure I'm the right person for it. But yeah, it's good to surprise yourself and just to say yes to these sorts of opportunities.
So there's a couple of questions coming through, and there's a theme there, which I suppose is a challenge back about. Yeah, this isn't all about just being, having a nice time with interesting people. So a question from Cheryl saying, what did you feel this sort of the involvement of creative experts really brought, and would you have got the outputs you did without their input? So I suppose, Jenna, it's like cards on the table. Was this a nice to have, or was this having those creative people in the room an intrinsic part of getting the outputs you got?
I would say definitely. And I think that was one, it brought legitimacy. And it said, actually, it's really important to go through this creative process, to spend time thinking about the problem, to spend time coming up with potential solutions, but not just to stop at that. As researchers, we tend to stop at that, whereas we went through a prototyping process where we actually had to create physical models or representations of the new knowledge products that we had. So the process of doing that and actually seeing through the creative process into the prototyping aspects. So we had some designers involved, and that was really useful because it's a much more interactive and practical way of developing something. And speeds up the process. So as researchers, I guess typically we if we're developing new interventions or whatever, we spend a lot of time developing them before we then test them. Whereas this enabled us to start testing right from the get-go, which I would say was a really important part of having the creative experts there. And certainly with at AHP 2-minute talks, I mean, that has been the product that, I mean, it was launched on the 4th week and is now doing really well, you know, with almost 600 followers and from across the world. But if we hadn't had that session where we actually had to prototype and develop the product, I don't think it would have gone anywhere. So it was that creative making aspect was really crucial. In achieving what we did.
So let's just give that Twitter handle the recognition it deserves. So if you're watching the recorded version of this, you'll suddenly see that handle flashed up on your screen. If you're watching it live, we haven't done the post-production yet, but we'll put that Twitter handle at AHP 2-minute talks into the chat so that people can see it there, and very much recommend it. And that happened on the 4th week, Jenna. That was happening pretty quickly. Lovely, thank you very much. We've got questions piling up, which we're very much going to try and come to. And I suppose another question for you, Jenna, if that's okay, coming from Anna. Anna, thanks so much for joining, which comes back a bit to the validity point. So Anna's saying, how do we avoid disseminating superficially credible research that's actually seriously flawed? Might be attractive to clinicians and patients unless we sort of respect the peer review process first.
Really important question and important point. I think what we are suggesting here is not that we compromise the rigour of how research is done. It's actually about strengthening how research is done. So we're in a situation in health and social care where one of two things generally happens. One is that we produce research that's really rigorous, it takes a long time, we publish it, and then we try and make sure that it has an impact and that it's used. But an awful lot of the time it's not used at all. The second scenario is that we've got health services which implement changes without sufficient research evidence. And you know, everyone talks about this 17 to 20 year lag in doing a piece of research and getting it into practice. But actually you do need a bit of a lag because we need to ensure that the research is rigorous and that we have sufficient high quality evidence to warrant making changes to our services. But the problem is, I think, that we need to find somewhere in the middle. Because what we've got is in scenario one, researchers dreaming up impact pathways, and in scenario two, health services and practitioners reacting very quickly and implementing things that don't have sufficient evidence. So I think the way that we avoid doing that is to use much more of a collaborative process. You know, as Alex said, research is not a lone endeavour. We need to be making sure that practitioners and researchers are collaborating from the word go. And certainly Alex has reflected before about feeling coming to the workshops, it's not like you had a research project on the go and you sort of felt, oh well. And that's exactly the time when we should be engaging with practitioners right from the beginning, not in a tokenistic, because we're quite good at consultation as researchers. You know, we've all done that. We've come up with a project, we go and speak to practitioners. Is this acceptable? yeah, okay, maybe not, and then we go and get on with our research. I think this is actually again about when we go back to that concept of validity and who has a valid place in the research process, and we need to get a compromise in the middle, doing research in useful ways, sharing it in useful ways, and that it's useful and usable to both researchers and to practitioners. And that's where the change, I think, needs to come.
So Alex, it'd be great to get your reflections just a second, but Jen, just to reinforce, this is not about compromising vigour.
No.
This is about actually addressing
it.
It's enhancing it through that different approach to dissemination. Alex, your reflections?
Well, I did not think I'd ever be getting involved in research. Definitely was stepping back from that. And this has really opened my eyes to just how enjoyable and fun it could be.
I think we should stop press there. Research is enjoyable and fun.
Well, yeah,
okay,
maybe. Maybe. But certainly over those 4 weeks, that's how I felt each week leaving, that it was fun. And it allowed you to be more creative. I think we're very told, you think of research as being really strict and very serious, and it is, but it allows you to work in a different way.
Yeah. And you're not compromising the quality by playing with communicating in a different way. It absolutely doesn't. It doesn't in any way denigrate the research. It in a way elevates it.
And it's not an either or.
Yeah.
So we're talking about quality of research based on how it is done and how it is communicated and used. So it's an addition to, rather than saying, okay, we need to just be doing stuff that's quick and accessible. It's a blend of both and figuring out how to do that, really.
Jenna, thanks very much. Time, as always, is against us. And just to say, if we don't have time to get through all of the questions today in this event, we'll be sharing a link to where we can reflect on those in a bit more depth, whether that's through Twitter on our website or similar. So please do continue to send through questions and comments. None of that will be in vain. We'll certainly come back to you shortly. We're going to move to reflections in just a moment, but actually a couple of nice questions. So Jenna, I might come to you first again, if that's okay. Just about other groups. So we've talked about researchers and practitioners and creative experts. A question from Kate saying, how might patients play a role in tackling this challenge? But also a comment from Michelle saying, how would this film be received by managers and commissioners, particularly when time and space are in short supply in the current climate? So these wider groups, Jenna, reflections on how they can be involved in both this sort of process, but also in seeing what comes out.
Yeah. So managers and commissioners, the HPs who were involved were a whole range. So we had kind of from frontline, reasonably newly qualified AHPs right the way through to consultant AHPs and service managers. And actually, I'm really interested to see how service managers and commissioners react to this film. And this is the premiere event.
Did we mention it?
Yeah, just dropping that in again. And it is my intention to keep sharing this film and using it as a way to spark discussion. The idea about including patients and members of the public is something that I think is really important and that I have reflected on a lot. In designing this particular project, I thought a lot about involving patients and members of the public. And the reason that I opted not to in this first running of the workshop in the pilot phase was that I was inviting practitioners to come into a space that maybe didn't feel safe for them, to be able to admit that they struggle to understand research evidence, to apply evidence into practice, might have been difficult to do that when there are patients in the room.
Yes.
The next time I run these workshops, and hopefully that will happen, I want to explore how we do that with different groups. This was very much a pilot project. It was a test. Let's see if it works. And I say a few times in the film that it was a gamble. It was a risk. So now it's just about moving forward, because absolutely all of these people have a really important part to play in shaping useful research.
And you mentioned where this goes next. Jenna, a question from Julie saying, are you doing another workshop with clinicians and researchers in Scotland? If so, please sign me up.
I hope so. If you want to send some funding my way.
If you have a check you want to put in the post, please do, and they'll be there. We are going to come to reflections in a moment, but just again to say thank you to people who've been sharing comments. For example, Debbie, thanks very much for sharing comments saying, love how you've shared outputs of this research, already pushing the boundaries and how outputs are being communicated to a wide group of practitioners. Debbie, thank you. We do have a whole range of questions which we'll be coming back to people in a different way after today's event, just because of the time constraints. So thank you once again. If you sent through a question which we haven't been able to get to now, rest assured we will come back to it. Let's do some key reflections from today's discussion. So if it's okay, I'll turn to our panel. Just ask one reflection from the discussion we've had. I'll go first, just to buy time, and then we'll go Georgie, Jenna, and then Alex. And my reflections actually go back to something, Jenna, you said right at the beginning, which I think can be overlooked in all of the fun regarding creative experts, is it started with a really good understanding of your target audience, and actually understanding the sort of the working lives of AHPs and how that diversity meant that you needed a different approach. And actually getting that really solid grounding seems like gave you the platform to go beyond. Georgie?
I think specifically today in the webinar, seeing the questions that are coming up on the screen in front of us, and to see that there's real interest and real engagement, and the questions that are so very relevant, I think, to what to what Jenna has built as a project. So to know that it's not just, well, that project's finished now, tick, put it back in its file, to see that it's building more widely from the project. I think in terms of my own research moving forward, I'll be thinking a lot about how I talk to practitioners as well as to patients and other researchers.
Thank you. Jenna?
I guess my main reflection is coming back to the motivation for this project in the first place, is that we do need a step change in how we produce and share research in order to make it much more useful to society. And actually, the only way that we're going to be able to overcome and to change, to move away from this linear approach to pushing research onto practitioners, from blaming practitioners for not using the research evidence that we produce, is for researchers to be much more critical and reflective on our research systems, and to do that by using different disciplinary lenses, but also different experiential lenses. So involving practitioners, involving patients, managers, all of the huge array of stakeholders. And actually sometimes the most useful people to involve are not the first and obvious choice. So to have a diagnostic radiographer sat next to a poet, sat next to a researcher in stroke, it works. The gamble works, and I think having that diversity and finding the spaces between our differences can be a really effective way in starting to tackle one of the most pervasive problems in health.
Think of the most obvious people, then cross them off. And find Alex?
I think from the whole workshop and webinar experience, it's made everything really, it's made me really enthusiastic. And I think just if you have an idea and you want to get it going, just as Jenna said, get in touch with people that you think might be able to help. Try to get things moving. Don't think it's just to be done all on your own. I think that's definitely a big thing for me.
Teamwork.
Yeah.
Lovely. Georgie, Jenna, Alex, thank you so much. Thank you again for joining. In terms of next steps, so as mentioned earlier, we've been recording today's session. And the video of the whole discussion, as well as just those key reflections at the end, will be available very shortly. We'll be sending a link just to where we can follow up some of the questions which we didn't manage to get to today. And I think just to finish, that if today's discussion has inspired you to do something different, to reach out to people who are possibly less of the obvious usual suspects, then I think please do that. Jenna, please let us know. We'd love to hear of it. We've had our first poet on today's webinar. If anyone would like to come on with a ballad answer next time, we can do that as well. But please do share your stories of approaching sharing evidence and learning in a different way. We'd very much love to hear. So to say thank you very much again to our panel. Thank you very much for joining, and we hope to see you at a future one of these digital events. Thanks very much. Have a great day.